You want me to smell your shirts, or you want to eat first? Eat. I did not mean to slam the door at all. Good. Sometimes people have to take meetings in bars.
That's not good. That's
She's
dangerous.
sitting in the parking lot. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things that can't change. Courage to change the things I can. Where anyone, anywhere reaches out for help, lift the hand with Alan on it, on the team. Always be there and let it begin with thee.
Subdivisions are banding together saying, we want to change and make a difference. We can do that, and we educate them on the impact. So we don't fight regulation, we try to change it, but we try to enhance what we're doing and trying to divert waste from the landfill and actually make usable compost. If we have any golfers, in here, we have anybody that loves to go to the park. Anybody community garden? Any landscapers? Okay, all of those places and things could use our compost. So just to kind of keep that in mind, when the city's talking about building a park for the kids, the park's going to require some type of soil, some type of compost, some type of material for that park. And that's where we can come in. And if you're already having sustainable loop within your own city, within your own community. We work with community gardens across the country in the places we operate. We operate in Florida. We operate in San Antonio, Texas. We operate in Memphis. So the city of San Antonio is a great example of in the framework. They have a organic collection process within the city. We work hand in hand with them. And the organic processing comes to our facility and we dump it off on here and work the process of actually creating the compost. You work within a framework unless you can change it, and then you maximize it.
Wow. The original legislation that created our office and us basically
I can stop this. I don't have to do this, Pooks.
as advanced recycling fees in it.
Can I help? Do you want to pick shirts or have me help you pack?
honest, I was not hearing this. So basically what it looks at is trying to codify some of those principles. So allowing for and encouraging mixed use districts and corridors is part of that. You know, before, the 70s, it's all about separating uses. We have commercial and we have residential, and that was the way it was. And that was the thinking at the time. Mixed use is definitely a more modern way to think about land use. We also have bike parking requirements for private developments. There are several districts without parking minimums. Again, back in the 70s, it was, you know, this use needs to have at least this much parking or more. And then, you know, so we have a lot of places without parking minimums, and some districts actually have parking maximums. Tree canopy retention and open space requirements, green building standards and incentives. And then we carried over our design districts. So we have 4 urban design overlay districts in downtown and a couple of corridors that sort of put an architectural review layer onto making sure that developments are more pedestrian friendly and just meet some more urban design principles. And then also part of the Unified Development Ordinance quote was, well, our engineering regulations, it's a separate document, but that was also part of the process of what Columbia was getting some of the more guidance in terms of how to lay out streets and sidewalks and bike lanes. And just, you know, having a little bit more information about how our streets should.
Because at some point in time,
So I think part of the important thing about how plans get to implementation on the street is looking at how feedback fits into the process. So there's a number of ways that staff considers and takes plan recommendations and translate that into actual projects, whether it be an infrastructure project or a private development project. We have different opportunities, whether it's a site plan review or a development review, where we make sure that those recommendations are put forth to the board or commission that has to make those decisions. But also public comment is really, really critical. And there's all kinds of opportunities from the very top level comprehensive plan, public meetings, where we're looking at the 30,000, and those are those kind of big citywide recommendations, all the way down to, you know, when an infrastructure project is about to be built, and there might be a public meeting coming out at that time and making sure that you really know what this is going to look like, because, you know, things get tweaked and again, realities come into play, and having a voice in that moment is also really important. And as planners, I mean, we constantly talk about how people don't sometimes come out on the earlier planning stages because it feels like it's way too far out, or, oh, well, that's just warm and fuzzy recommendations. That's not really going to affect my property, or that's not going to affect the road in front of my house. But then when that plan gets implemented later, and it is in your neighborhood or it is on your street, then everybody comes out and wants to, either they haven't heard about this before, or, oh, I didn't know that was happening. And sometimes that can really stop a project from happening. So being engaged from the top all the way to the end of those processes is really, really important. So I just did a quick little series of slides to talk about different ways to get involved. So the Planning Commission and the DDRC, which is the Architecture Review Board, the Board of Zoning Appeals, these are public meetings that happen every month where our appointed boards and commissions are looking at projects and different requests from developers. So being aware of those meetings, looking at the agendas, coming to those to provide public input is important. And again, that's more on the, you know, a project level side. But also public meetings, this is a from a DOT public meeting, coming to those meetings and talking about, you know, providing feedback for infrastructure that may be coming is also important. We do bike head counts twice a year. The planning division has been doing these since 2014. This is also something we started doing as part of the Walk Bike Columbia plan, because traffic engineers have been counting cars for decades, but a lot of cities don't have a regular process for counting bicycle and pedestrians. So this is really important for getting data to help make our decisions moving forward. And you'd be surprised, frankly, in some areas, how many pedestrians and cyclists we have in certain parts of the city. Parking day, this is one of the more fun things that we do. The planning division has also been facilitating this event for about 7 or 8 years. And does anybody know what parking day is? Or Yeah, okay. It's really fun. And it, I mean, it started, you know, in San Francisco, like, I don't know, 15 years ago or something. It's basically a one-day event where you turn a parking space into a space for people instead of cars. So people make just these really fun and crazy installations, and ours has primarily been on Main Street, but it's always the third Friday in September. So put it on your calendars. We're gonna be doing it again this year. It's just a really fun way to engage with people and just start thinking differently about how our streets really are places. Open streets. This is something that our Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee puts on every, well, they have done every year. COVID was certainly put a damper on that, but this year it's back. It's gonna be on May 1st, and it's gonna be in the Earlwood and Elmwood Park neighborhoods. There's a route. So this is really just, again, it's basically shutting the street down to cars and letting people and kids ride their bikes, and there's gonna be different event or like activity leaders and different things to do. It's just a really fun outside event for from 2 to 5 on a Sunday. Well, this is another initiative of our Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee. It's called Take a Walk. And instead of reinventing the wheel, they're taking existing walking and biking tours that already, like the Historic Columbia that's on, or SC63 has a bike tour of civil rights locations that are important throughout the city. So every month they're helping to promote these walking and biking tours. And this is a picture I just love to show. This is the Gervais Street from a National Geographic article from 1984. Gervais Street was named one of the worst streetscapes in America. And now it's been almost 40 years, so that's before most of y'all were born. But I think what it talks about is just what it shows us is it takes a long time, you know, just to see some of these come to light. I think the Vista plan and the Green Street Bridge is something I get excited about because I saw the plan happen, and now it's part of the infrastructure is being implemented. But we don't plan for today, we don't plan for tomorrow, we plan for the future. So it's just something we have to keep in mind when it comes to a vision for walking and biking. We really have to think long term. Something may not seem like it makes sense today or tomorrow, but if we're thinking about how our city's going to look in 20 or 30 years, you know, it really does matter. So that's all I have. And we have some contact information as well, but if you have some questions.
This is, I think, for both both of you, but I kept having my questions answered as I went through. But one thing that remains is about bicyclist visibility, and not like visibility of like bicyclists as they're actually on the street, but just like the expectation and like recognition of bicyclists as having like the right to be on the road. I feel like that is one bar to people taking up cycling as a mode of like actual transportation, is of feeling a lack of safety because they don't feel like drivers recognize their right to be on streets. And one thing that I worry about as someone who doesn't bicycle here but has it other places is the focus on dedicated bike lanes. I think that actually signals to drivers that they don't belong on the street and they only belong in a bike lane, and that if you know, if there's a bike lane on Gervais and there's not a bike lane on, I don't know, Hardin, that means that drivers on Hardin get like angry when there are cyclists there. And so I wonder if like how much the sort of the reception and the response of drivers comes into play when you're sort of deciding whether or not to put a bike lane on a street with a high you know, speed limit, or possibly actually lowering the speed limit so it's a safer place for bicyclists to be and actually share the road, not like on the side or not even in a non-separated bike lane, which has the problem of like doors opening into, but just like actually right there in the lane with the cars, like a normal vehicle of transportation.
I mean, I'm not a bike planner, but there are definitely specific recommendations about where the facilities should be. You know, the sheriff's idea is definitely lower volume, lower speed. There have been conversations about lowering speed limits in different parts of the city. I think Shannon just did that not that long ago.
Earlwood's getting ready.
What's that?
Earlwood's getting
Are
ready.
they? Okay.
They're gonna try.
Okay, well, that's interesting. Oh, well, I'd like to see that since I live in Norwood. But that's a great point. I think we all struggle with the whole, what comes first, the chicken or the egg, you know, do the facilities in and suddenly people are gonna start cycling, or do cyclists just have to get out there and then the demand is more clear? And it's a little bit of both. I think that, I mean, there's I don't have the slide here, but during the Walk by Columbia planning process, we had the also planning who did that plan, had this great slide of the statistic of like, I think 2% of people are called fearless and whatever, they'll cycle anywhere on the interstate or whatever. And there's another category of percentage that people are pretty confident, they'll pretty much go anywhere. And there's like 67% of the population, me included, want to bicycle more, but are just not quite comfortable because of that, what you're talking about. And I think that by providing some separated facilities and getting people more comfortable with the idea of just cycling, that's important before they consider it being their mode share to get to work. Do you know what I mean? But I think it's a little bit of both. I don't know. I mean, Mark, do you have any?
Yeah, so I think we talked about with the active guides, they have a lot of those guidelines based on different bike facilities. And these different bike facilities have different levels of visibility. So a standard bike lane, you'll just have a line, and that's really hard for people to see. You're worried about cars drifting into that lane. Then you have like buffered bike lane, you have a little bit extra space, a little more visibility, but it can still be a little scary if your car just drifts over. Whereas you can also have some cities implement like bollards inside the buffer to actually have a vertical element to further discourage cars from getting into those areas. So there's different levels of providing more visibility to cyclists. But then one thing that like Lucinda was saying about trying to implement things for when people don't know about it. One of the things that we think about a lot when it comes to bike ped facilities is can we paint before we build? So can we do the bike lanes, see more people biking? Now you have bike count numbers that show engineers that there are more people using this road as a bike facility. Then we can advocate for do we want to upgrade that to safer bike facilities and kind of build up that way.
Like a temporary installation.
Right.
Yeah, that's been really successful.
Yeah, there's a big movement of things like tactical urbanism where people where citizens get together to try and put these facilities together for temporary use to just show and advocate for that these are facilities we need, that these are facilities that make people feel safer.
Yeah, I think another thing I forgot to mention, but part of the Walk by Columbia plan looked at 8 to 80 routes. And so that was, it's not the complete bicycle network, but the idea was that there would be at least a way to get from most parts of the city to downtown with an 8 to 80 route. And that's primarily, I mean, the idea being that an 8-year-old or an 80-year-old could use that facility and feel safe and comfortable. Those are largely going to be separated facilities, you know, side paths or cycle tracks at this point in time, because we don't have a culture here of drivers paying attention overall to cyclists. I mean,
I just worry you can't make that culture with separated bike lanes. You can't do it. It makes people think they don't belong here. They belong there. And so you're always going to have people, I mean, those people have to get from their house to the bike lane.
well,
They
I
have
mean,
to drive on their
roads,
street.
I mean, on certain roads, cyclists don't belong in the travel lane. You know what I mean? A high volume, high traffic road is not a safe place for a cyclist to be. And that's what the bike flood planners tell us, is that if you've got, Assembly Street or UG Street, they do need a separated facility to be safe. You know, there's real safety, I mean.
Not if
data
you
out
have,
there.
not if you have other parallel streets that are slower and more reasonable, right? Like,
Right, and that's something that Columbia has.
you just
for
don't
president, is
need
that-
people on those streets, and the people who do go on those streets are people who are like serious, dedicated, like cyclists, like, you know, messengers
Yeah.
or something. And they don't need protection. They need, you know, they need to be respected as someone who can be on the road.
Yeah, well, and they are, I mean, state law, a cyclist is considered a vehicle, so I mean, that's true, and they are allowed to be there. It's just the majority of the folks that are cycling are not those fearless folks, but the other great thing about Columbia is our street grid is the perfect opportunity
Yeah.
to have different streets that are more thoroughfares, certain streets that are transit oriented, and certain ones that are more the bike ped corridor. So we have the right infrastructure set up. It's just a matter of getting there. So that's a good point. Yes, sir.
Maybe a little broader topic of our discussion. Appreciate the work y'all do, and you talk about mixed use approach for geographical areas and the housing issue of, I live out Broad River Road area, and I'm beginning to see the implementation of what I guess is going to be improvements to Malfunction Junction or, interstate process out there. I bike, and I also use the bus Comet, because you can put your bike on it to get into the city and then bike around, or to get over to West Columbia bike. So I like the connectivity and the transitions of different modes, particularly mass transit. My question is, and I know it's not your area, but you probably do work closely with DOT. Is that improvement on Interstate 26 or any major corridor into the newer expanded housing clusters going to consider the high occupancy vehicle lanes and to the trans? You may not know, but I hope with the demand for individual car parking, bike lanes, open streets, smart streets, whatever the other term is, complete streets.
Right.
That the consequences of just more traffic dumping in to the community of city and other gathered areas, mixed use areas. If more people had the incentives and the opportunity to park in a mixed use area outside of town, ride on a bus that's going to be in a high occupancy vehicle lane and traveling faster than you can on your own, is that being considered between y'all and DOT? You know,
I don't know specifically about the high occupancy vehicle, although I'm glad you brought that up, because one thing I meant to mention, but I didn't really put my notes with. Last February, the Department of Transportation adopted a complete streets policy. So basically, what that means is from that point forward, when a city or a county has a biking and pedestrian plan that's been vetted or sanctioned or is a partnership with the Central Midlands Council of Government, that they will consider those part of their planning going forward. So in other words, if there is a facility that's on a DOT street, which again, because of so many streets being owned and operated by DOT, our walkway permitting plan has facilities, recommended on all these streets, that becomes part of the DOT's process for, if they're gonna repave this street and there's a bike lane, they have to do that, or they don't have to, but they have to consider it. I don't know about I did get an email from somebody at DOT a few weeks ago asking about, for the Carolina Crossroads, are there any facilities in this location or this location in terms of just looking at intersecting streets or how we might need to, so that they're aware of what the plans are for, the city's recommendations for bike ped.
I just think bus service, I think of Atlanta, I don't know that we're ever, and you talk about future planning, I don't know if we're going to progress to Atlanta size, but somewhere in that direction. And I remember being in Atlanta one day, listening to the radio, so I drive on, the mayor of Atlanta was talking about, I don't have this many millions of people that reside in the metro area or in the city limits, I guess. But each day, it either doubles or triples with people coming in and leaving. They have buses, they have rail, and I just think that in a city our size, we kind of discount the opportunity of like bus, or we don't have to invest in rail if we bring out all the opportunity with the bus service to invest in it, to make it work better functionally with destinations that may not be in the city area, that may not even be in Richland County area. and therefore make your jobs a little easier to make the experience on the streets in the city more enjoyable, more inclusive of spaces, because we've reduced or at least maintained, slowed the growth of demand for individual car parking.
That
Right, I would-
metro, then that's a big conversation there,
It is.
'cause I live in Atlanta, and so there's a lot of people that are on the outskirts of suburban Atlanta, they don't wanna have the rail system. Because it does create a less safe environment in some people's perspective, and so there's a big, that's like, I mean, that's like an expensive thing to do, you have to have, enough jobs to support it. And then you have to make sure that it stays safe. So, I mean, we never brought it out. So I lived on the side facing Greenville, which is the eastern side of Atlanta, and they never brought it out. They did start using a bus system, and a lot of my neighbors would use that, especially if they had to go into an office 2 or 3 times a week. And they use the Walmart parking lots for parking for that bus. And so, yeah, and so that was pretty popular, but as far as that railroad, that trail system, I lived there for 9 years. It's a conversation before I got there, and it's a conversation when I left.
I totally concur with that as a reality. My daughter lives in Atlanta. She drives her single car in and out and says, well, it's just not convenient, or, as a single solo woman traveling, I don't feel safe. But those are the realities I think should be addressed in part of the planning.
She probably has a peach pass, so they're passing lanes to get around the traffic.
And like electric vehicles now can get an exemption from the fee for the occupants.
And going back to the comment here, I think it might be, if you're more interested, I would reach out to the comment, because they are in the process of looking at their current route system and finding different nodes that people are traveling to and from. They're looking at all the lines they have currently, trying to see if they need to rework, move some lines, go to connect different areas. So I'll reach out, because they're in the process of designing that now.
They actually did a very good presentation yesterday. You may want to go back and watch it.
On what?
On the comment, did a very good presentation yesterday on increasing ridership. So I think they're
Oh, good.
The recording should be available.
I missed it. Okay.
We can make the recording available.
Kind of about what we're about is with climate ready, and there's obvious connections. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great point. It's a great point. Yeah.
I had a question for Mark, that's using the language from Lucinda's talk of, so I like the planning. I understand the difficulty of implementation, but I feel like the third step there is sort of ongoing maintenance. And I know you do your updates every 5 years, but especially looking at the sort of the corridors that you had highlighted, like that Decker-Trenum intersection. Oh my God, that is like, that's like the least pedestrian friendly place I've ever been, I think. My mother just moved here from Richmond, Virginia, and she just drives around, and she is so, she's kind of just taken aback by her words are beautification. She doesn't use the words of, having the tree canopy and the shadescape and all of the things for pedestrian friendly things. But what she just sees is like, something that was probably part of a plan 20 years ago, like plant this tree that is now dead in a concrete block of weeds that, so my question is, how do you take your planning and then the implementation and then the ongoing maintenance that keeps all of the things that you are very looking to do to make that space look better than it does right now, but to make sure that is viable ongoing beyond we planted our tree, where is it, 10 years later?
Yeah, and for, at least for transportation issues, it really depends on who owns the street, which is a problem. Or a big hurdle like Columbia, where how we divide it up, whether it's the city, the county, or DOT. So I think Decker might be a DOT road. And so for a lot of those improvements for those kind of things, where we usually try, and whenever they're doing like scheduled maintenance or scheduled work, that's when we try and reach out to try and implement our priorities. So for a lot of the ones that are owned by them, we're kind of stuck on their schedule. So that's a big problem, or big hurdle we have to overcome when it comes to planning, especially transportation.
And so, our public works directors, we have these conversations all the time.
All the time.
It's just-
We do everything by encroachment on DOT streets mostly.
Yeah.
So we actually maintain it. I'll give you my card before you leave, because
Yeah.
if we have a dead tree somewhere, I need to know it, okay?
I mean, just for what it's worth, I actually live in Casey, but they've been redoing the street in front of my house. It was supposed to be a 3-month project. We're on a year and 6 months right now, and they still haven't repaved the giant mud pit in front of me, and everybody says, it's because it's a DOT road. And I was like,
Oh, I live in Mason Bridge. Welcome to the party.
so,
Construction at 5:30 this morning. Haha.
You don't have to keep, keep green clean, that's what I mean, when I was growing up, it was like,
Columbia Green and.
Even those beautiful.
It's just, I guess it's just.
Columbia clean, so that folks adopt roads and.
Yeah, they're talking about that now, actually, council just talked about it a couple weeks ago, I think, trying to get in the water district.
So there's already an adopt a highway program, there's an adopt a street program in the city. Yeah, council's getting ready to do something called Columbia Water Clean that none of us have any idea about yet. We're getting ready to see.
Yes, sir.
Thanks so much. That was really great. Oh, and also I would be remiss if I didn't recognize we have a candidate for county council here. Ryan Burrows.
District 6. Good to meet you.
So just to foreground my question, so when we're talking about bike-ped plans, it's part of this bigger picture of kind of decarbonizing our economy, right? That we just talked about the keynote last night. Like if you're going to totally reinvent your economy and decarbonize it, that means higher density living, and then this transportation option becomes like essential to making that happen. And one of the points that the keynote speaker made last night is that when we are doing these big transformations, those are opportunities for us to make sure that we're doing it in a way that's kind of more just. So I was particularly interested to hear about the 29023 pilot plan, right? Because that looks like that's a great example of trying to use this transition to create greater justice. And so I wanted to hear your responses or reactions to how that went. And was the Greenview debacle, was that part of that, or was that a separate? Do you know what I'm talking about? The Greenview neighborhood that kind of freaked out about the bike lane?
About Fairroad?
Yeah. Was that part of that 29203 thing, or was that something different?
Well, that was basically, that's an interesting story. So let me back up just a second. So for Walk by Columbia, part of that planning process, when again, it was connecting to transit, but also there's the 5 E's of bike-ped planning, is engineering, education, encouragement, enforcement, probably forgetting one, but anyway, equity was a 6th E that also planning and design added to that process. So they did a lot of analysis about underserved areas and places that have been historically disadvantaged, making sure that those were part of the process and part of the prioritization project or process for choosing priority projects. I will say that I guess because of the funding challenges that we have, often the implementation of projects is opportunistic. So DOT is going to repave a road. We have a lane, we have a bike lane. Let's do it because that's our opportunity. And if they repave now, and we don't strike it right, it's going to be decades before we can do it again. So we don't just get to pick the priorities that are out there unless it's so the Fair Road in the past, the planning processes always have these public input and council meetings have public input, planning commission, all these things. But in the past, implementation of an infrastructure project wouldn't necessarily, restriping of a road wouldn't necessarily have its own input process. It's like, well, these plans are vetted, when that project started being implemented, and this is for those of you who may not be familiar, the Walk by Columbia plan had bike lanes scheduled to go on Farrow Road. It was one of our priority projects. In fact, there were 4 projects identified by the plan as top catalyst priorities. That was one of them. And when that paving project came up, and was gonna be implemented, people came out of the woodwork, and I mean, lots of people from the surrounding neighborhoods and say, I don't want a road diet, I can take this road to work every day, this is gonna change my commute. And it just became a very difficult position for the city to be in, because basically the striping started going down and there wasn't enough, I think, public notification or engagement. And unfortunately, the decision was made to like stop it in its tracks and, you know, just respond to the people's concerns. And so that facility did not get installed. The good news is we recognize that there is an important, that we need to do that. If it's gonna be a road diet, we need to have more public input in advance of the actual implementation of a project like that. So we did that extensively with Calhoun Street, twice actually, because there was a set of public meetings right before COVID. And so then everything got put on hold. And so when we started ramping up and being like, okay, we're gonna do this, we had another set of, they were virtual, but public meetings. But I mean, that's a great point. The equity is absolutely an important issue, and just really just making people you know, this is the information, and feedback is important, but at the same time, I think a lot of it is just expectations and people knowing what's coming, you know?
Yeah.
So,
Listen, I do want to say, and I think we did one thing on Farrell Road, or DOT did, they pulled all the hurricane assets out, actually set the project up the way it was going to be, and put the new traffic configuration in place. And I don't know if people just didn't understand it, but it worked fine then. But when you took it all off and started painting the new chalkboard, they really had
that was a
trouble.
problem. Right, I forgot about that, right, yeah. We started about almost like the temporary tactical urbanism, and that was just like, okay. And I mean, the traffic studies had indicated that the level of service wasn't gonna be dramatically affected, but people's perception sometimes just takes over, you know? So it was an unpleasant situation, but hopefully we've learned something from that and it won't go that way again, but. Okay. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. I'll answer the question. Mistakes that we made 25 years ago.
What are those mistakes?
So we actually, 25 years ago, there was actually some bad food practices. Probably where you actually tell it without resources. What we did is we came back in, they came back in. We went to the 2 resources.
Oh, right, so they didn't write down.
So they built it right up to the curb, or they built it. So when you look at Main Street.
Makes you scared for
So
yourself.
we actually.